The Fox News studio hummed beneath its polished exterior, blue lights glinting off glass tables and crisp lapels. The panelists sat in their familiar arrangement, backs straight, smiles tight, the illusion of discourse hanging in the air like mist. And then, with a casual lean forward, Tyrus exhaled something sharp. "Is that black leadership?" He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The words were slow, coiled, deliberate. Like a snake sliding across polished stone, his co-hosts shifted in their seats, but none interrupted. The sentence hung there, pulsing with electricity. Outside the frame, America bristled. It wasn't just a question, it was a provocation, one dipped in history, masked in politeness, and hurled like a grenade across racial fault lines. In one breath, Tyrus had done what so many others in his political lane had perfected, made a black woman the problem. He didn't say Jasmine Crockett's name. He didn't have to. The clip was sliced into digestible outrage, circulated like oxygen through conservative feeds. Within hours, hashtags were trending. Not my leadership. Too loud to lead. Crockett unhinged. Screenshots of her congressional hearings, freeze frames of her furrowed brow, her raised voice, her stare, all recast into caricature. But Crockett hadn't even spoken yet. Morning broke over Capitol Hill with a quiet frost. The sun barely touched the marble columns before the cameras began to roll. Jasmine Crockett stepped out of the car, her heels clicking with practiced certainty. Her expression was unreadable, carved from stone, not because she was unfazed, but because she couldn't afford not to be. She had seen the clip, she had read the tweets, she had heard the silence of colleagues who chose not to defend her. As she approached the chamber steps, aides flanked her with tablets and talking points, but she waved them off. "I don't need reminders," she said under her breath. "I remember everything." Inside the chamber, the energy shifted. Reporters' heads turned, chairs swiveled, opponents stiffened. Crockett didn't acknowledge them. She removed her coat, smoothed the sleeve of her navy suit, and sat down. This wasn't a hearing anymore. This was a trial, of perception, of gender, of race, of voice, and whether she liked it or not, she was the defendant and the prosecution all at once. An aide leaned in. "They're going to try and push your buttons." She didn't look away from the dais. "Let them. I brought receipts." Across town, Tyrus was back on air. His tone was jovial now, disingenuous humility laced with faux confusion. "Look, all I'm saying is, if someone's screaming in Congress every other day, maybe it's time we rethink who's representing what." He chuckled. The others chuckled. The camera didn't blink. But across the country, something cracked. In barbershops and brunch tables, dorm rooms and courthouses, the question echoed louder than he intended. "Is that black leadership?" Some asked with venom, others with exhaustion. But a growing number asked it with a different tone, one laced not with judgment, but reflection. And on the House floor, Jasmine Crockett began to prepare her answer, not in a tweet, not in a soundbite, but in testimony, in fire, in facts. She wouldn't scream, she would prosecute, and the country would watch. The studio lights were colder than they looked, blue-tinted, sterile, casting a hollow glow over the sleek desk and polished smiles. Fox News wasn't just broadcasting. It was staging a performance of authority, of order, of certainty. Tyrus leaned in, not with passion, not with fury, with calculation. The former wrestler-turned-conservative pundit had found a new ring, this one lined with talking points instead of ropes. His voice cut through the éclabousse, higher, low and unshaken. "Is that black leadership?" It landed like a stone in a glass house, not shouted, not spat, just dropped, carefully, like he knew exactly how much damage it would cause without ever raising a finger. For a moment, no one moved. His fellow panelists offered smirks, shrugs, knowing glances. They didn't need to agree. The silence did it for them. The audience heard it loud and clear. He hadn't said Jasmine Crockett's name. He didn't have to. The segment was clipped within minutes, uploaded, reposted, spliced over footage of Crockett's most impassioned congressional clashes, her finger raised, her voice commanding, her eyes blazing with contempt for obstruction and deceit. In conservative circles, she was framed like a cartoon villain, unstable, angry, loud. They called it brave commentary. But in the spaces where truth couldn't be clipped, where history wasn't erased by a chyron, something more dangerous was unraveling. Because that question wasn't new. It had been asked before, on plantations, in courtrooms, in back rooms where policies were written by men who would never face their consequences. Every syllable of it had been sharpened by years of respectability politics and weaponized stereotypes, and now Tyrus had simply updated the phrasing. That night, Twitter burned. Memes surged. Hashtag too loud to lead. Pash emotional, not effective. Hashtag Jasmine unhinged. They weren't just mocking her tone. They were erasing her substance. But Crockett wasn't new to this. She'd been underestimated before, in law school classrooms, in courtrooms as a public defender, in the Texas legislature where men twice her age tried to talk over her and failed. She knew the game, but this time, the stakes felt different. This wasn't just about her, it was about the framing of black women in power, the manufactured outrage that turned strength into threat, assertiveness into aggression. The next morning, the Capitol was cloaked in gray. A light drizzle glazed the marble steps, softening the sharpness of the building's architecture, but inside, tension crackled like static. Jasmine Crockett's heels clicked with the rhythm of ritual. Her coat hung crisp on her shoulders, her hair immaculate, not a single expression betraying the fire building beneath her calm. Every step was deliberate, not just forward, upward, a woman walking not into a meeting, but into a storm. As she passed through security and toward the chamber, aides scrambled beside her, whispering updates, media fallout, talking points, press requests. She waved them off without breaking stride. "No spin," she said under her breath. "Let them hear it straight." Inside, the committee room buzzed faintly. C-SPAN cameras were being calibrated. Reporters glanced up from their notepads. Colleagues on both sides of the aisle exchanged looks, some sympathetic, others performatively indifferent. She sat, back straight, hands folded, eyes fixed ahead, not fidgeting, not flinching. The same woman who'd stared down prosecutors and crooked officials, who'd taken the weight of injustice and returned it with cross-examination. She didn't need a statement. She was the statement. She sat, back straight, hands folded, eyes fixed ahead, not fidgeting, not flinching. The same woman who'd stared down prosecutors and crooked officials, who'd taken the weight of injustice and returned it with cross-examination. She didn't need a statement. She was the statement. And far away, in a Fox News studio, Tyrus leaned back in his chair, unaware, or perhaps entirely aware, that he'd just lit a fuse. A slow-burning one. The kind that doesn't explode all at once, but smolders quietly until it reaches the heart of something explosive. She wasn't going to tweet her way out of this. She was going to testify. And America was about to find out what black leadership really looks like. It had started, as most fires do in Congress, with a spark no one expected. A routine hearing on sentencing reform that turned into a skirmish over power, race, and voice. Jasmine Crockett sat before the microphone, posture composed but unyielding, sleeves crisp, earrings small and defiant. The topic, disparities in federal sentencing, particularly how mandatory minimums disproportionately affected black and brown communities. Numbers were on her side. So was precedent. What wasn't, however, was the patience of those who didn't want to hear the truth. Across from her, Representative Gary Palmer shuffled his papers with performative annoyance. She was questioning a Department of Justice official, drawing a clear, damning line between policy and lived trauma. Her words weren't just legal, they were personal. "Would you agree," she began, voice steady but rising, "that policies disproportionately affecting one demographic group, when enforced over decades, constitute more than just coincidence?" The official hesitated, but before he could answer, Palmer cut in, voice loud, tone clipped. "Congresswoman, if we're going to throw around racial generalizations..." She didn't turn toward him. "Not yet." "I'm not throwing," she replied, her tone tightening like a violin string. "I'm presenting data." He interrupted again, and again, 3 times within 2 minutes. Now she turned. "If I can finish my question without being talked over, that would be nice." There it was. The moment. Not a shout. Not a scream, just command. In a room where she was expected to defer, expected to smile through obstruction. And because she didn't, the narrative machine began to move. Later that day, the clip would be edited, her voice slightly louder, the interruptions edited out, the context discarded like garbage. What remained was a few seconds of a black woman talking back, and for certain, medicant. Figures that was enough. Fox ran it with a chyron. Jasmine Crockett loses control in committee hearing. On Truth Social, the commentary was more vicious. She should be disbarred. Embarrassment to Texas. Another Maxine Waters wannabe. But inside the hearing room, what had happened was clear to anyone with ears. Crockett had drawn a line between policy and pain, and someone couldn't handle it. Palmer leaned back, jaw clenched, lips pressed together in false indignation. Across the aisle, Replit Nancy Mace smiled like she'd just heard a private joke. Crockett saw it all, filed it away. Every look, every smirk, every calculated silence. The chairman attempted to move on, gavel tapping like a heart skipping a beat. But Crockett wasn't done. She leaned into the mic, gaze unwavering. What I said today wasn't about race. It was about impact. If that makes you uncomfortable, then maybe that discomfort is telling you something. Silence. Not the kind that feels like peace. The kind that feels like the sky just cracked and no one's sure if the storm's arrived yet. Her aides watched nervously. Some whispered that she'd gone too far. Others clapped quietly behind closed doors. But the damage, or the clarity, was already done. That hearing became the blueprint for the attack to follow. Tyrus would quote it. Candace Owens would meme it. Commentary after commentary would frame it not as righteous confrontation, but emotional instability. They wouldn't debate her arguments, they would question her tone. In the days that followed, political clips blurred into cultural critique. News anchors stopped mentioning sentencing disparities altogether. They only talked about Jasmine. Was she too loud? Too emotional? Too much? No one asked if she was right, and that silence, that strategic silence, spoke volumes. Back in her office, Crockett watched the coverage without flinching, and her phone buzzed every 30 seconds, messages of support, of caution, of pure fire. One from her mother read, "You were born with a fight in your chest. Don't let them shame you for using it." You were born with a fight in your chest. Don't let them shame you for using it. Jasmine sat in the stillness, staring out at the Capitol dome. They had clipped her words. Now she would sharpen them. Not for revenge, for reckoning. He didn't need to yell. That was the brilliance of it, and the danger. Tyrus sat on the primetime panel again, this time with a grin carved into his face like a mask. The conversation had shifted smoothly from border policy to behavior in Congress, and the producers had teed it up perfectly. A B-roll montage of Jasmine Crockett's most assertive moments in hearings, chopped and looped over ominous music. She was pointing, she was raising her voice, she was doing her job. Then came the smirk. "Look," Tyrus began, holding his palms out like a man too reasonable to be held accountable. "I'm just asking the question. If someone's always emotional, always yelling, is that black leadership, or just theater?" A chuckle from the host. A knowing nod from the guest next to him. No one said angry black woman. They didn't need to. The implication did the heavy lifting. Across the country, millions watched, some nodding in agreement, others grinding their teeth in silence. But to those who knew the language of American media, the subtext, the subterfuge, the centuries of rhetorical camouflage, the statement wasn't vague at all. It was a dog whistle, a siren disguised as subtlety. Jasmine Crockett watched from her living room, the screen casting flickering light against her face. She wasn't surprised. Tyrus had done exactly what men like him had always done, wrapped a direct insult in faux objectivity and let the crowd do the rest. But she didn't get angry. Not outwardly. She got quiet. Quiet like a fuse. Later that evening, MSNBC picked up the segment. Joy Reid, eyes narrowed behind designer frames, wasn't having it. "There it is again," she said into the camera. "The well-worn double standard. When white male politicians shout, they're called passionate. When black women speak with clarity and force, they're accused of performing." Clips rolled behind her. Jim Jordan yelling himself hoarse. Lindsey Graham pounding the table during Kavanaugh's hearing. No one had asked, "Is that leadership?" But for Crockett, the concern wasn't just media hypocrisy, it was the broader machinery, how a single comment could metastasize into a campaign, how the smear didn't need to be explicit to become effective. In her office the next morning, her team was split. "We could issue a press release," one aide offered, "clarify what happened in the hearing, push back on his narrative." Another chimed in, "Or we could go full scorched earth, call it what it is, racist dog whistle, misogynoir, make it a bigger story." Jasmine didn't speak right away. She stood by the window, watching the dome catch the morning light. "They want a reaction," she finally said. "What they're afraid of is a rebuttal." She turned from the glass, face calm, eyes dangerous. "Let's give them one." That afternoon, her comms director compiled a reel, not of her, but of them. Tyrus, Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, a decade of moments where blackness was dissected, distorted, and dismissed in public view. She reviewed every clip, every word. And then she began to write. Not a tweet, not a thread, a statement, a transcript of controlled fury. And this time, she wasn't playing defense. Later that night, she took to the mic at a university speaking event already scheduled weeks prior. The crowd hadn't come for politics, but they were about to get a lesson in it. "I was asked this week whether what I do in Congress is black leadership," she said, her voice calm, her hands folded at the podium. "Let me tell you what black leadership is." A pause. "It's standing in rooms that were never built for you and speaking like you belong there." The crowd held its breath. "It's taking fire from people who've never lifted a finger to serve their community, and still showing up every damn day to fight for yours." The silence afterward wasn't empty. It was full of weight, of reckoning, of collective recognition. Tyrus had asked a question. Jasmine had begun to answer. And America was starting to listen. There's an art to silence, not the absence of speech, but the delay of it. In the courtroom, attorneys know this well. Wait long enough, and the person who thinks they've won will keep talking, keep revealing, keep slipping. That's exactly what Tyrus and his media allies did. In the days following Crockett's speech, the conservative press doubled down. Tyrus appeared on 3 separate shows. He called her dramatic, emotionally unstable, unprofessional, always with a grin, always wrapped in false objectivity. But Jasmine had already begun constructing her case, not in rage, not in retaliation, but with the patience of a woman who knew the rules of engagement better than her enemies knew their own playbook. Behind closed doors, her team was combing through hours of footage, not of her, of them. Tucker Carlson, circa 2019. "Why does everything have to be about race with these people?" Tommy Lauren, 2020. "If they don't want to be profiled, maybe they should act less suspicious." Candace Owens, just a month earlier. "We don't need loud women in Congress. We need leaders." Clips upon clips. Moments the public had forgotten, but the internet had not. And now they weren't isolated incidents. They were a pattern. Jasmine leaned over the conference room table, watching the montage with a steel gaze. "Put it together," she said, "and keep it clinical. No music, no dramatics. Let their words hang themselves." The next morning the video went live. Title: What They Say When They Think No One's Watching. It wasn't aggressive. It didn't even mention Crockett's name. It was quieter than that. Deadpan voiceover, timestamps, source citations, but the effect was devastating. Within 2 hours, it had 1 million views. By noon, it was trending. On The View, Sunny Hostin referenced it mid-segment. Finally, someone's using their legal mind to fight back without stooping to the level of the attacks. MSNBC cut in during commercial breaks to play excerpts. Even some conservative figures, unprepared for the receipts, backed away slowly, pretending they had never really co-signed the smear. But Jasmine wasn't finished. That evening, she walked onto the floor of Congress like she was walking into court. The chair recognized her. the mic came alive. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't point fingers. She laid out her case, one fact at a time. I've been accused of being angry, emotional, unfit to lead, but what I see over and over is that the criticism rarely follows the content. It only follows the tone. She paused, letting her words settle. Where was the outrage when male colleagues shouted across this chamber? Where was the outrage when others accused witnesses of lying to their faces? It only seems to appear when women, black women, speak without permission. Across the room, her GOP colleagues sat stiffly. Some rolled their eyes. Others leaned back, arms crossed, as if immune to shame. But the C-SPAN cameras were rolling, and the public was listening. Jasmine continued, "This isn't about me. It never was. It's about a machine. One that decides who's allowed to speak and how loudly. One that punishes volume only when it comes from the wrong mouths." She lifted a stack of documents, printouts of the very transcripts her critics had tried to bury. If this is what emotional leadership looks like, then I hope we see more of it, because emotion, unlike propaganda, requires a soul. For a few seconds, the chamber was still. Then came the murmurs, the shifting of weight in chairs, the subtle glances from members who suddenly wished they hadn't retweeted Tyrus the night before. Outside the chamber, Crockett's press secretary was already flooded with interview requests, not to explain herself, but to expand, to teach, to lead. And quietly, the tide turned. She hadn't screamed. She hadn't lashed out. She had prosecuted the narrative, and she had won the opening argument. Before Jasmine Crockett ever stepped onto the House floor, before the cameras, before the fire and the headlines, she was in Dallas County, Texas, fighting ghosts no one else wanted to see. Not the kind of ghosts that haunt, the kind that suffer, the kind that vanish in courtrooms where no one remembers their names. It was 2013 when Crockett took on her first public defense case, a 17-year-old black boy arrested for obstructing a sidewalk. No weapon, no threat. Just walking home, earbuds in, hoodie up. He couldn't afford bail, so he sat in jail for 2 weeks before seeing a judge. 2 weeks for walking home. Jasmine didn't just get the charges dropped, she got the arrest expunged. And then she called a press conference and said, plainly, in this country, being young and black is not probable cause. It didn't go viral. No networks picked it up, but that was the beginning of a pattern. Over the next 7 years, she defended more than 400 clients, most of them black, brown, poor, forgotten. She wasn't getting rich. She wasn't building fame. She was building something else, a library of receipts, case after case, record after record, each one a brick in the house she now stood in, Congress. And now, with Tyrus and the Fox News bench questioning her qualifications, Jasmine didn't argue. She opened the archive. Clip 1, a body cam video from 2018. Crockett on the courthouse steps, arms crossed, addressing a judge who tried to revoke bond from a single mother over a missed hearing, the hearing she was never notified about. Clip 2, a 2016 radio interview. Jasmine calm, by dismantling Texas's cash bail system, quoting not opinion but state-level arrest data. Clip 3, a town hall, 3 years before George Floyd, where she told a sleepy audience, "If y'all wait for white America to believe we're worth saving, we'll die waiting." Now those clips were being rebroadcast. Now the media wanted context. But Crockett didn't explain. She simply posted one tweet. "Don't tell me I just got loud. I've been in the trenches while you were adjusting your mic." It hit like scripture. By morning, her legal past was trending, not as defense, but as a rebuttal. On CNN, Van Jones nodded solemnly. "You don't have to like how she talks. You don't have to agree with her politics. But you cannot pretend she hasn't earned her seat." Even conservative analyst Ana Navarro paused before speaking. "I may not support everything she says, but we need to stop pretending she's just a performer. That woman's fought harder cases than most of us have fought hangovers." But the most surprising endorsement came from Judge Lina Ortega, a lifelong moderate, Latina Democrat, once publicly critical of Crockett's style. She released a statement. "We don't always agree on tone, but I have reviewed her record, and I will say this, Jasmine Crockett is not new to this. She is true to this. Meanwhile, Tyrus stayed silent. His co-hosts began shifting their talking points from angry to aggressive, from unfit to divisive. But the damage was done. The receipts were permanent. She didn't need to scream. She didn't need to plead. She didn't even need to respond. Because every time someone asked, "Who does she think she is?" the answer was right there in the case files. She was the one who answered calls no one else took. She was the one who stood between injustice and silence. She was the one who came from the trenches, with proof. And in that moment, it became clear to anyone paying attention. Crockett didn't rise because she played nice. She rose because when the system broke people, she bent it back with her bare hands. And now that same system would have to face her, fully awake, fully armored, and carrying every name she ever defended like a badge of honor. The courtroom was metaphorical, the judgment very real. It wasn't Tyrus who delivered the next blow. It wasn't Fox News. It was a voice Jasmine Crockett had never expected to hear. Not like this. Congresswoman Laverne DuBose, Democrat from Michigan, black, Ivy League, respected, measured, one of the very few women in Congress who had marched with her hand in hand for voting rights reform, and now, one of the few who hadn't said a word all week. Until now. At a closed-door Democratic caucus meeting, DuBose stood, her voice even, her tone maternal. "Jasmine, you're brilliant, but you're walking too close to the edge. There's a difference between disruption and destruction." The room froze. She didn't yell, she didn't accuse, but her words carried weight. "You have every right to be angry. God knows I've been. But our people, they don't need another martyr. They need strategy. We are trying to govern, not just go viral." Jasmine blinked, stunned, not by the content, but by the source. Laverne DuBose had been one of her early allies, back when Crockett was just an activist with a JD and a megaphone. She had mentored her, defended her, but now she was drawing a line, and that hurt more than anything Tyrus had said. Jasmine stood slowly, no script, no retorts, just one breath, and then, "With respect, Congresswoman, I don't raise my voice to go viral. I raise it because some folks only listen when we scream. If my volume bothers you more than the violence I speak against, then maybe you're not hearing me." Silence. But DuBose didn't back down. She crossed her arms. "And what happens when your fire burns bridges we still need to cross?" "Then I'll build new bridges," Jasmine replied, "with people who aren't afraid of the sea." Moke. It wasn't defiance. It was survival. Outside that chamber, the headlines were multiplying. Crockett's name was becoming a symbol, but of what depended on who you asked. To some, she was the embodiment of raw black resistance, unapologetic, unbent, a modern Sojourner Truth in a fitted suit. To others, she was dangerous, loud, uncontrollable, a liability for Democrats trying to maintain order. But behind closed doors, it wasn't ideology that divided them. It was approach. Laverne DuBose, for all her loyalty to the cause, believed in preservation. Jasmine Crockett believed in combustion, and then rebuilding from the ashes. One wanted progress through diplomacy, the other demanded it through confrontation, and both were right, and both were wrong. The pain of that tension was heavy. It was generational, historical, personal. Because when a system is built to silence black women, even the loudest among them sometimes become the silencers, fearing backlash more than injustice. And Jasmine saw it in DuBose's eyes. Not betrayal, fear. Fear that Jasmine's fire would scorch the ground they'd all fought to stand on. But Jasmine didn't apologize. Because silence hadn't saved Breonna Taylor. Diplomacy hadn't saved Sandra Bland. Respectability hadn't saved Tamir Rice. So she raised her chin and said one last thing. "I love this party. I love our people. But I wasn't elected to be palatable. I was elected to be honest." And then she left. Outside, cameras waited. Inside, the room buzzed. Lines were being drawn, not between Democrats and Republicans, but between survival and surrender. And Jasmine Crockett knew exactly where she stood. 2 days later, Jasmine Crockett's name trended again, not for what she said, but for what was said about her. Fox News, mid-evening, high ratings hour. Tyrus, seated comfortably across from the host of the five, leaned into the SLAMS camera with the same confidence that made him a fan favorite on the right, ex-wrestler swagger, conservative wit, and a smirk that preceded every verbal jab like a tell before a punch. "I don't mind a strong black woman," he began, pausing for effect. "But I do mind a reckless one pretending anger is leadership." The audience clapped. The panel chuckled, and then he threw the line they had all waited for. "You tell me, is that black leadership, or is that just performative rage with a press pass?" A rhetorical nuke disguised as commentary. He didn't name her directly. He didn't have to. The segment exploded across the internet in minutes. Clips cut, spliced, looped. Commentators picked sides. Conservative influencers framed her as a symbol of democratic instability. Some moderate Democrats echoed concerns about decorum. But Tyrus wasn't done. The next morning, Fox friends invited him back for a follow-up. This time, he came armed. In a carefully edited montage, they played clips of Jasmine Crockett in past hearings, fiery, interrupting, using phrases like, "Let me educate you," and "This ain't the plantation." Then Tyrus leaned in again, serious now. "I'm asking an honest question. If this is what black leadership looks like in Congress, where's the strategy? We've got real issues in the black community. Schools, crime, family breakdown. And she's performing like it's open mic night at a slam poetry cafe." Back in D.C., Jasmine watched the clip on her phone, alone. She was used to attacks from the right, but this one was different. This wasn't just an insult. It was a trap. Because if she didn't respond, they'd call her scared. And if she clapped back too hard, she'd prove them right. That was the trick. That was always the trick. Fox didn't want a debate. They wanted a reaction. They wanted her to become the caricature they were selling. And for a moment, she considered silence. But then she remembered something. Silence is what they count on. Silence is what lets the lie take root. So she picked up her phone, opened X, formerly Twitter, and typed, "I don't need your permission to lead. I don't need your approval to serve. And I won't sit quiet while clowns with microphones question the dignity of black leadership. If I make you uncomfortable, good, that means you're finally listening." Black leadership is real. #unbought, unbossed. The tweet shattered the timeline. Within 20 minutes, it had 10,000 retweets. Within an hour, every major political journalist had weighed in. But that tweet wasn't the end. It was the beginning of what would become the most contentious House Oversight Committee hearing of the year, where Jasmine Crockett would confront not just the GOP, not just Fox News, but the very narrative trying to erase the legitimacy of her existence. Not because she wanted the smoke, but because she was the fire, and they had just poured gasoline. The hearing was officially titled, "Government Oversight of Urban Development and Federal Allocations," dry, bureaucratic, practically designed to be forgotten, but the air in the committee room was electric, every seat filled, every camera rolling, and every staffer alert. Because it wasn't about zoning laws anymore. Not after Tyrus's viral jab, not after Jasmine Crockett's fiery clapback, not after the words, "black leadership," had been hijacked and weaponized on prime-time cable. Everyone knew what this hearing would really be about. Jasmine entered in silence. Dressed in dark navy, hair pinned back, face unreadable. She didn't scan the room, didn't wave, didn't nod. She went straight to her seat and opened her folder with slow, deliberate calm, the kind that precedes a storm. On the other end of the dais sat Representative Glenn Grothman, known for his monotone voice and thinly veiled jabs. Today he was first to speak. "Before we begin, Madam Chair," he said, glancing toward Jasmine, "I'd like to ask that all members conduct themselves with the decorum befitting this chamber. Recent public outbursts have, shall we say, raised concerns about professionalism." The coded language was undeniable. Dog whistle, wrapped in parliamentary etiquette. Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't speak. She let the moment hang, long enough for the weight of its intention to be felt. Then she slowly reached for her mic. "Point of clarification," she said, her voice even, tone surgical. "Are you referring to a specific member? Or are you just uncomfortable with passionate black women raising their voice? The room shifted. Grothman's eyes narrowed. I'm referring to any member who forgets that they represent the United States Congress, not a protest rally. Interesting, Jasmine replied. Because when the gentleman from Florida yelled across this chamber, I didn't hear you mention decorum. When a sitting member called another a bimbo last week, I didn't hear you ask for restraint. So it seems what makes you uncomfortable isn't the volume, it's the voice. Murmurs rippled through the press bench. Aides typed furiously. Cameras zoomed in. Then Repro Marjorie Taylor Greene leaned into her mic. This isn't about race. It never was. Jasmine didn't let that sit unanswered. With all due respect, Congresswoman, when people tell you what's about race, it might help to listen instead of dismiss, because it's very convenient to claim race has nothing to do with this, when it's never your identity that's under attack. Boom. There it was. The hearing had officially shifted. It wasn't about zoning, or budget gaps, or urban infrastructure. It was about who gets to lead, who gets to speak, who gets to be angry, and still be taken seriously. And for Jasmine Crockett, it was about finally ripping the mask off a system that demands her silence, then punishes her for speaking. Don't ask me to lead, she concluded, then shrink when I do it differently. That moment, raw, unfiltered, televised, sent shockwaves far beyond Capitol Hill. Clips were up within minutes. Headlines follow. Crockett fires back in fiery exchange on race and representation. Black leadership takes center stage in unexpected oversight clash. And in the background, Fox News aired another segment that night. Same smirk, same sneer. But this time, the pushback was louder than the punchline, because now, Crockett wasn't just a congresswoman, she was a symbol of the voice that wouldn't be boxed, belittled, or broken. In the days following the explosive hearing, the footage of Jasmine Crockett's defiant testimony circulated like wildfire. But what came next wasn't another tweet or televised debate. It was something far more visceral and deliberate. She left the Hill. Not metaphorically, literally. Just 48 hours after facing down coded insults in the hearing room, Jasmine Crockett boarded a plane back to Dallas. No press conference, no entourage, just purpose. The media barely had time to catch up before images appeared on social media. Crockett, standing under the blistering August sun, surrounded by black mothers, local organizers, high school students, and faith leaders outside a shuttered housing project in South Dallas. No podium, no prepared remarks, just a single folding chair and an open mic. If they want to question what black leadership looks like, she said, then they better be prepared to see it in its rawest, most unfiltered form, right here. Applause erupted. She wasn't talking in sound bites anymore. She was building a counter-narrative in real time, not on Capitol Hill, but in the neighborhoods where policy failure had always been personal. Local outlets picked up the story, then national ones. CNN, Crockett holds public forum amid racial firestorm. The Root, Jasmine isn't waiting for Congress to catch up. But the blowback was immediate too. Tyrus, again on Fox, said, "This is what I'm talking about, performance art, street theater, that's not leadership, that's ego." His co-hosts nodded. They showed brief clips of her rally, carefully trimmed, angled to appear unruly and emotional. Then they moved on. But Jasmine responded, not on air, not in the studio, but standing outside a closed school where kids once ate free lunches. "Let me be clear," she said, addressing the crowd. "This isn't performance, this is presence, and if they call this performative, ask them why they've never shown up." Her words cut through like a scalpel. She went on, "When I yell in Congress, they say I'm angry. When I come here and listen, they say it's theater. What they really mean is, there's no version of me that makes them comfortable. And I'm done chasing their comfort." It wasn't a campaign rally. It wasn't a press grab. It was strategy. Because Crockett understood what her critics didn't. That leadership, real, painful, grounded leadership, doesn't look like a neat row of suits at a hearing. It looks like walking into places power avoids. and daring to call them sacred. In one clip, a young girl, maybe 12, asked Crockett what she would do if Congress tried to silence her again. Jasmine smiled, bent down to the mic, and said, "I'll keep talking, and if they cut off the mic, I'll bring one of my own." The crowd rose in a standing ovation. Later that night, #TET This Is Leadership began trending on X. Meanwhile, Fox aired another segment, a panel discussion titled, "Congress or Clout Chase? Has Crockett Gone Too Far?" But something had shifted. This wasn't just a moment anymore, it was becoming a movement. Because while the pundits debated in sanitized studios, Jasmine Crockett was out in the streets, reshaping the conversation about race, rage, and responsibility in American politics. And for the first time, in a long time, she wasn't responding to the narrative, she was writing it. The air inside the MSNBC studio was electric. Jasmine Crockett had been invited for a primetime sit-down with Joy Reid, an exclusive. The network marketed it as The Reckoning Unfiltered Wababi Show with Jasmine Crockett. No handlers, no talking points, just an open chair across from one of the sharpest political minds on air. The chyron blazed across the screen. Tyrus called her a performer. Crockett responds live. Millions tuned in. This wasn't just political commentary anymore. It was cultural confrontation, and the audience knew it. Joy Reid opened with fire. "Congresswoman, they called it performative. They said you were more heat than light. What do you call what you did on that House floor?" Jasmine leaned in, calm, grounded, unflinching. "I call it a warning shot." The silence hung. Deliberate, heavy. "A warning," she continued, "that black women in power will not be reduced to sound bites, stereotypes, or the approval of men who don't understand the people we fight for." Joy raised her eyebrow. "Are you referring to Tyrus?" "I'm referring," Jasmine said slowly, "to everyone who thinks blackness needs to come in hushed tones, Ivy League accents, and proximity to whiteness in order to be legitimate." Gasps on Twitter. Commentary exploded in real time. Crockett didn't stop. Tyrus asked, "Is that black leadership?" "Let me tell him what it is. It's being interrupted and finishing anyway. It's being disrespected and responding with clarity. It's being called angry and refusing to apologize for the fire." Joy asked, "Do you think this is about you personally, or is this systemic?" Crockett didn't hesitate. "It's bigger than me. I'm just the latest vessel they're trying to crack open. But this isn't about ego. This is about how America still prefers its black women seen, not heard, unless they're singing, praying, or dying quietly." Boom. Twitter exploded. Clips began circulating before the interview even ended. Unapologetic leadership. #Jasmine's Tyrus. #This is why she fights. Reid asked her if she had a message for those who criticized her methods. Then, within her own party, Jasmine nodded. "To the ones who think I should tone it down, tone doesn't kill bills. Silence does. And I will not let decorum become the graveyard of justice." Joy looked stunned for a moment, then just nodded. "Congresswoman Crockett, thank you. You've not only responded, you've redefined the fight." As the broadcast ended, pundits across networks scrambled to respond. Fox News aired a counter-segment immediately. Tyrus appeared again, but this time his tone was measured. He called her calculated, media-savvy, and dangerous to the narrative. He wasn't dismissing her anymore. He was warning about her. Meanwhile, CNN hosted a panel of black female scholars and leaders dissecting what Crockett's rise meant for the next generation of leadership. The streets weren't quiet either. In Houston, Philly, Detroit, murals of Jasmine Crockett began to appear overnight. Graffiti stenciled her famous line, "If they cut off the mic, I'll bring one of my own." What had started as a smear had turned into a symbol. What began as a question, "Is that black leadership?" was now an anthem. She didn't just respond. She reclaimed the stage. And the echo wasn't fading. It was spreading. 3 weeks later, the House Oversight Committee reconvened. The same room, same long mahogany table. But everything had changed. Jasmine Crockett wasn't walking in as controversial. She was walking in as a cultural force, a reckoning. C-SPAN preemptively spiked its viewership estimates. Twitter trended the committee hearing hours before it began. All eyes were back on the chair Tyrus had once mocked. This time he wasn't present, but his words echoed in every chamber. Is that black leadership? Those 6 words had aged badly. Since his attack, Crockett had gone viral 4 times, been featured on The Breakfast Club, MSNBC, The Root, and had become the face of a movement, not just of resistance, but redefinition. And now, armed with receipts, she was about to flip the script. The gavel struck. Chairman James Comer attempted to maintain cause control. But the energy in the room tilted toward Crockett before she even spoke. One of her colleagues, Reverend Maxwell Frost, yielded his time. Jasmine adjusted the mic. No shaking hands this time. She started slow. The last time I sat in this chair, someone questioned not just my argument, but my existence as a leader. They didn't debate my facts. They debated my form. She clicked her tablet, revealing an exhibit, a string of texts leaked from Tyrus's political advisor. Let's bait her. She always reacts. Get her animated. Make it go viral. The message read, time-stamped 1 day before the last hearing. Gasps echoed through the room. A staffer dropped their pen. Jasmine didn't flinch. This wasn't a policy disagreement. This was a strategy, to delegitimize a voice by provoking a stereotype. Her words were knives, polite, poised, and surgical. Then came the pivot. But what they didn't account for was that I don't scare easy, and I come with facts. She launched into a breakdown of how misinformation, partisan theatrics, and racialized baiting were weaponized tools used in hearings, not by outsiders, but by insiders. She named names, quoting Tyrus's past remarks on race, citing his association with commentators known for inflammatory rhetoric, referencing his record of dismissing systemic racism as overblown liberal drama. And then, she turned the mic toward the committee itself. If black leadership looks unfamiliar to you, maybe that's because leadership hasn't looked like me for far too long. She paused. I won't match the volume of your disrespect. I'll outlast it. The room was dead silent. No one interrupted. She leaned back, her work done. This wasn't a meltdown. This was a masterclass. Even the conservative-leaning press called it undeniably effective. A few headlines read, Crockett outsmarts the smear, congressional takedown goes viral, gain. Receipts, resolve, and respect. How Crockett flipped the narrative. The day the culture came for Congress. Tyrus attempted to respond later on Fox, but something had shifted. He looked less sure, less cutting. His tone was more cautionary, as if aware he'd awakened something he couldn't put back in the bottle. Jasmine, however, was already on to the next issue. That night, she tweeted, "Don't worry about the noise, mic or no mic. I stay amplified." Still that leadership. The post racked up over 3 million views in 12 hours, and just like that, the question that once sought to diminish her became the very proof of her rise.